Hello and welcome to the video. This video is actually looking at two products rather than just one. One is the new Emax Tinyhawk II and the second is the Mobula6 from Happy Model. Now the reason that I'm doing two models rather than one is, you know what, I could actually do one video for each, but I know the questions that I'm going to get are going to be, which is better? Is it the Emax or is it the Mobula6? Which should I get in this particular instance? Which should get for my friend, etc, etc. So you thought, you know what? Rather than do two videos, let me just do one and compare both. So in this video, let me do a whistle-stop tour, first of the Emax, then of the Mobula6, and then I'll do a kind of roundup at the end and talk about my impressions of both and compare and contrast the two. Again, links for all this stuff is down in the description if you want to go and have a look. Both are very, very capable, fun flyers, well under the kind of 50-gram limit. In fact, with things like the Mobula6, even with the battery, we're only talking about 27 grams. So they're well under the 250-gram limit and provide an immense amount of fun, particularly as they're both using modern run cam style cameras, which are a dramatic upgrade to the previous versions of these two particular models. So without any further ado, let me start by unpacking the Emax Tinyhawk II and talk about that one first. So let me show you how this came in the box. So you have the model itself, and then in the box you have a couple of spare bands to hold the battery in place, a little screwdriver, spare power connector, a 450 milliamp hour 1S pack, as well as the 300 milliamp hour 2S pack, spare set of props, and you get the charger as well. Now this is a 75mm wheelbase. Dry weights is, without the batteries, about 31.2 grams. The manual is really good and actually talks through how you set everything up and how it's all put together. The propellers look the same as the previous version, the Avon TH style 4-bladed push-on props. The flight controller in here, we'll look at the Betaflight pieces in a minute, is an F4 based flight controller, 5 amp 4-in-1 ESC running BL-LES, an Emax SPI receiver, and in Betaflight, we'll have a look in a moment, you have to be a bit careful, make sure that you have the right setting, the right profile for the battery that you're using, whether it's 1 or 2S. VTX power in here is switchable between 25, 100 and 200 milliwatts, but the big differences here, as you've probably already spotted, is the frame has changed dramatically. The frame is now much tougher than the original version, and it also includes LEDs that go out into the arms that light up when the quadcopter is armed. Each of the spokes that go out to the outside of the frame are doubled, and the whole thing is a lot beefier, which makes it a lot more crash resistant. Running into Betaflight, let's go through some of the settings in here. Plug it in using the top USB port connector, which I do like having access to this so you can make sure that when it's flat and level on the desk, it's flat and level in Betaflight. So with everything connected, it looks like this. Let's go through each of these. Enable expert mode. The ports are set like this. We have the VTX Smart Audio so we can change everything. Configuration, standard X, D-Shot 600. Motor stop is not turned on. 8K gyro and 2K PID loop frequency. The receiver support set for FreeSky D by default. I would be careful about running FreeSky X with telemetry. I've been trying it on FreeSky D here and it works fine, but be careful. Lots of the latest FreeSky radios that are shipping don't have the option for D8 mode. Air mode's turned on-screen display, anti-gravity and dynamic filter. Interestingly, by default, they haven't got the RX loss turn on, but the RX set is set for the D-Shot beacon configuration. And that's the one that makes all the motors beep to help you find it if it lands in long grass. Power and battery is set like that. Failsafe is set to drop, which is exactly as it should be. PID tuning looks like this. Let me just run through some of the different profiles because we talked before about the warning in the box. So there's profile 1, that's profile 2, and then we have profile 3 as well. So make sure when you are in Betaflight that if you change the 1S to a 2S battery, you are changing to the right profile and rate profile for that battery as per the manual. By default, the modes are set up really nicely. There's an arming switch, and then there is angle in the low position for the modes, horizon in the middle and rate at the top, which is how I tend to set these indoor quads. The beeper is set for auxiliary 3, so flicking that into the high channel position will make all the motors sound, and we have turtle mode or flip over after crash set 2. You're going to need some time in the on-screen display to move things around. And if I do version in the CLI, we can see we're on a pretty up-to-date version of Betaflight 4.1 using the latest type of software. So that looks really good. So let's talk about how this thing actually flies. Now, the image from the camera is far superior, in my humble opinion, to the original Emax camera that came with the previous versions. This little Runcam Nano 2 is a 1/3 of an inch size sensor, so it's a little bit bigger, 700 TVL line CMOS, and it works really nicely. No jello at all and flying brilliantly. Now, this flight and image is on an overcast day. There is a bit of fisheye lens on the camera, but it is working great, and it's not bad in lower light conditions as well. The quad itself, even on 1S, is hovering well under a 1/3 throttle and has tons and tons of power. Now, I got into a little bit of trouble in here because the wind is straight into the quadcopter's nose. It's about an 18 mph wind, and I got way too high, and I'm in angle mode here with the nose fully pushed over, desperately trying to get back where I took off from, and it's just kind of sat there. So I'm having to kind of wait until the wind dies down in order to make it back up the field. But in normal flight, this is a super stable, very fun craft, and is very forgiving for brand new pilots as well, particularly when you set it up in angle mode and running it on 1S. Couple of things to watch out for on this. The motors are soldered into the main board. That's probably going to give better flow for the power, particularly when you're going to run 2S. So be aware of that. Even though the plugs are still on the board to plug the motors in, it is soldered. So if you destroy a motor, you're going to have to get your soldering iron out. There has been reports of white flicking and flashing on some goggles. I haven't experienced it at all here, apart from when I go to the edge of range on 25 milliwatts. And if I was running this regularly on 2S, I may upgrade the power connector on here to something like a little XT30, just to make sure that I'm not getting any voltage drops due to the current being pulled using a 2S setup. So next, look at the Mobula 6. Now, the thing that surprised me was the huge size difference between the Emax Tinyhawk II and the Mobula 6. This is a little quadcopter, a little bit cheaper as well, about £67 from places like Banggood. And the unboxing experience is a little bit less polished. It just comes in the box with the quad in some bubble wrap. There are different versions available: FreeSky, FlySky receiver, and there are 2 versions of the motors, 19K and a slightly more powerful 25K. I've been running the 19K here and found it a very lively little model, even on the 1S batteries that you get with it. You get 4 1S batteries in the pack, 300 mAh, spare set of props, the little screwdriver as well. You get the charger for the batteries, and then you get this little manual which kind of talks about how you set it up in both D16 and D8 mode. Again, if you have D8 mode, it's probably better to use it because, again, it's an SPI style onboard receiver. In fact, when we go into Betaflight in a second and have a look at the PID tuning and setup, you'll see it's very similar to a lot of the settings that we've just had a look in the Emax model. Now, this has an F4 based Crazy Bee flight controller, 5 amp BL Heli S 4-in-1 ESC again, 5 amp again this time too. Gem fan props. VTX on this is only set to 25 milliwatts, 40 channel, has got race band, and is also smart audio ready. I've had a couple of issues with this one where occasionally it will forget the last band that I was on and always come up on race band 3, I think it is on this one. And it also has a Runcam Nano 3, which again is a really cute little camera. A much smaller lens, doesn't do quite as well in darker conditions, but still works beautifully in decent light. So let me show you what this one looks like when we plug it into Betaflight. So in Betaflight, everything looks good. The USB port's at the bottom, so you have to plug it in underneath, and you have to have the battery unplugged as well for this. So that's how it's set up. Again, TBS Smart Audio on UART 2. Definitely deja vu here. D-Shot 600, motor stop isn't turned on. Motor direction is reversed, interestingly, so be aware of that when you're putting your props on. 8K gyro and PID loop frequency. The CPU load still isn't bad though, even with that setup. SPI receiver support, again exactly the same. Both of these have kind of bind buttons on the board themselves, and you can also do the binding from the CLI. Same kind of setups. Interestingly, anti-gravity isn't turned on by default, but both the settings for the beacon tone, where the motors will make a slight beeping noise, are turned on by default. Power and battery looks like that. Failsafe is set to drop. PID tuning for this little guy looks like that. Just run through the different rate profiles as well, as we kind of had a look around those on the Emax model. Now, interestingly, the interface for Betaflight hung up a little bit, and that might be because we're using a slightly older version of Betaflight on here, but I'll show you that in a second. Rebooting it, going back into modes, we can see the mode setup is very basic. There's arm and angle set, and that's pretty much it, so you're going to have to spend some time in there. Then we have lots of settings set up to change the different profiles. So if I just go back and kind of show you what the different profiles look like. On-screen display will need a little bit of moving around. By default, it's using the much larger font. And in CLI, if we check the version, then we can see it's actually quite an old version of Betaflight, 3.5.7, which is dated from March last year. So even though this is a new model, it's interesting that they haven't played around to get the latest version of Betaflight running. So how does it actually fly? Well, again, exactly the same conditions, flying directly after the last Emax. You can see here that the smaller lens isn't capturing quite as much light, and the kind of contrast isn't quite as nice. Now, this is a Runcam Nano 3 FPV camera on here. It's much smaller, and that smaller lens isn't quite doing as nice a job. It's fantastic fun to fly, whereas the Emax was hovering even on 1S at about a third throttle. It's just under half throttle for the Mobula, but the Mobula, the settings on it feel much more responsive, and it feels like something that you want to throw about. And the smaller size means that you do want to shoot for smaller gaps. This is a much more responsive model straight out of the box. So even though it's only a 1S model, it's flying beautifully outdoors. Again, this is still kind of the windy conditions. I think the fact that it's a smaller model, it isn't catching the wind outdoors in the same way. So this is absolutely flyable in an outdoor environment, but be aware it is only 25 milliwatts on the VTX. It's only 20 grams, and the way it's put together on mine seems pretty good. I have had reports from other Mobula6 owners that some of the quality hasn't been great, but so far this one has stayed in one piece. And that's probably the last couple of things that I'll mention on this. First of all is that the frame isn't anywhere near as robust as the Emax one. This is back to the Inductrix size of Tinyhawk, the original ones that we all started playing with. And because of that, there isn't a lot of plastic in the frame. So if you hit something hard, even though it doesn't weigh very much, it is going to break. Be aware of that SPI receiver and the need really ideally for a D8 mode to fly this. Make sure you've got that on the radio before you press the button. The lower battery on this, if you're flipping and rolling, can pull it in a slightly eccentric orbit, but to be honest, you're going to have to be flying it pretty hard to feel that. But again, this is an absolute blast to fly. So which one of these is better? That's a very interesting question, and the answer is very subjective. Both of them represent the latest technology from people like Happy Model and Emax. Both of them are well put together, they fly really well, they come with the batteries, with the charger, with the model itself, and they give you an awful lot of fun for well under the £100 mark. Most pilots will be able to buy either of them and have an awful lot of enjoyment, both indoors, but also, as I've just demonstrated, outdoors as well, even running on a 1S battery. Both of them don't have really long flight times. You're only going to get a handful of minutes out of these things before the battery is going to be completely depleted and will need to be charged up. So having those extra 1S batteries in the box from Happy Model will let you have more time in between charging. But for me, I would choose the Emax Tinyhawk II when you want something that is a little bit more robust and you don't mind the extra weight of the model. Now, I've been a fan of the Emax Tinyhawk series the whole way through, but the new camera on this and the slightly more robust construction and actually the LEDs in the individual arms to show you when it's armed makes this a much nicer model than the previous versions. That camera in particular is a huge improvement over previous versions of the Emax Tinyhawk. Now, you can buy the camera separately, but it would be tricky to install into those older versions because the camera housing again on this new Emax Tinyhawk 2 has been updated and gives a slightly broader range of movement and tilt if you do want to fly in horizon or rate mode and zoom about on 2S. I think the Tinyhawk 2 potentially could be a better selection if you're looking to get into indoor flying with its slightly more robust construction and its slightly calmer flying characteristics straight out of the box. It is very stable, so if you're learning to fly, it's going to inspire an awful lot of confidence. It's easier to hover in one place if you're practicing your line of sight too. It also has the ability to run 2S if you want. Again, both of the power connectors on both the Emax Tinyhawk and the Mobula6 are the solid pin construction, so they'll be able to handle the 1S power fine and probably be okay for 2S. If I was going to run it exclusively on 2S with the Tinyhawk, I would probably update the power adapter. And the last thing that might swing it for you is the Emax Tinyhawk 2 does come with that little case, which is great for transporting it and keeps it from getting damaged, allows you to keep all the pieces in there. There's extra space if you want to buy extra batteries. And that would be my tip. If you went for the Emax Tinyhawk, make sure you order at least 2 or 3 extra batteries to go with it, as they don't come in the pack. Now, the Mobula6 does pretty much everything that the Tinyhawk does, but excels in a couple of slightly different areas. There have been some reports, and people have been in touch with me to let me know that the Mobula6 has been a bit of a problem for them with frames breaking and other things going wrong. So be prepared for that. Those are not the kind of things that I hear about with the Emax Tinyhawk, but it is one of the lightest 1S whoops that I've ever seen. It's really small and compact, and it will fly incredibly well. It's really, really fun, and if you are a more experienced pilot, it will feel much more lively to you and you'll have a lot more fun out the box without having to play with it. Don't forget though, with the Mobula6, it's only 1S only, but you do get a number of batteries in the box. So again, there's going to be slightly longer time in between charging cycles. You're only going to get a couple of minutes of flight time out of each of those batteries, but by having 4 or 5 in your back pocket means you're going to get a half decent time flying around before you need to charge everything up again. I would probably be tempted with the Mobula6 when I order one, if I can get my hands on a spare frame, I would probably order one at the same time. That seems to be the part that gets broken the most. It is quite lightweight and flimsy, and in the event of a crash, there is the chance that it's going to snap. Both of these models have the ability to be tinkered and changed with. There is new versions of the flight control software, new versions of the ESC firmware, and I may have a go at updating one of them to see what difference it makes. But in summary, both of these are really great choices, and they represent kind of the state of the art with these kind of indoor flyers that actually will fly really nicely outdoor too. If you want something that's a little bigger, a little heavier, a little bit more robust, a little bit learner friendly, I'd go for the Emax Tinyhawk II. If you want something that's lightweight, potentially going to need a little bit more TLC, but you can fly it like you stole it straight away, then the Mobula6 is probably the one to go for. Thank you for watching my video and watching right to the very end. If you want to find out what I'm currently working on, you can follow me on social media by searching for Painless360 in the usual places. If you'd like to become part of the inner circle, then you can become a Patreon. Details are in the description and you get lots of additional benefits. Check out the playlist section on the channel too. I organise all of my videos into playlists, and it's called something like Introduction to or for Beginners. All of the content is aimed so that you can start at the very beginning, and it teaches you that subject, starting with simple principles and moving up to teach you everything you need to know.